project was to get a better understanding of the relation between social exclusion and different modes of violence. There was a third dimension in the research that has to do about initiatives by the community to try to cope with violence, but the results that we got has been quite poor. Actually, we have been working with 9 communities, 6 in El Salvador and 3 in Costa Rica. Just only one of them, in Costa Rica, we found an organized community. So that's the reason why I don't take into consideration that third dimension, although at the end, I will try to answer why we found these kinds of communities, non-organized communities, and which are the factors underlying that can explain the difficulties that a community can have in order to become organized. The study is a comparative study of 9 communities, 6 in El Salvador and 3 in Costa Rica. What makes sense about the comparison are the 2 countries. Although they are situated in the same region, a very tiny and small region, that even you don't see in the map, because in the map you see North America and South America, and hardly you can see Central America. Although they are located in the same region, they have quite different histories behind that, and that explains why Costa Rica is a relatively calm country with low levels of violence, while El Salvador is now one of the most violent countries in the world. So the comparison makes quite sense between a relatively peaceful context vis-à-vis a violent context. These are the results about social exclusion. We approach social exclusion by 2 steps. The first step, as our analytical proposal, is that exclusion is produced in the markets, specifically in the labor market, through the productions of what we can call precarious work or precarious jobs. But there is a second moment in the production of exclusion that has to do with the state and the development of social citizenship. If the state is able to develop social citizenship in the traditional way via education, policies and health policies, can to a certain extent counteract the effects of this primary exclusion, which is produced by the market and specifically by the labor market. So the 2 axes in this kind of a diagram try to show the vertical axis, the dynamics of exclusion and inclusion by the labor market, and the horizontal axis shows those dynamics in terms by the intervention of the state. What we did, this comes from our household survey, what we did was a cluster analysis. Here I have aggregated these 3 communities in Costa Rica and the 6 communities in El Salvador. We have done the same exercise in a separate way by every community, and the picture you get is very similar, with the exception of one community located in the metropolitan area in Costa Rica, where you can find 4 clusters. In the rest of the communities, you find this kind of duality. And this kind of duality is telling us that not everybody in those communities is excluded with the same intensity. You see those clusters that come closer to the point, the origin of the coordinates. That is the area where exclusion is harder, has a greater impact. The other interesting thing is to compare the cluster, which is in the lower part of the 2 diagrams, to compare the case of El Salvador with the case of Costa Rica. Because in the case of Costa Rica, you see that the cluster has been displaced towards the right. And that means that the state has been successful to a certain extent to neutralize social exclusion generated by the labor market. Now, One of the things we are, as I said at the beginning, we try to get a better understanding of the relation between social exclusion and violence comes into this, this slide. In a certain way, what we're saying is we have three types of violence, or modes of violence. We make a basic distinction between profit-oriented violence and social violence. And social violence, you have intra-family, between neighbors, gender violence, etc. Okay? And profit-oriented violence, which normally is related to organized crime. One of the things we found in the research is one of these violence become predominant and in a certain way plays a crucial role in the dynamics of violence in each community. And that's the reason why we call contextual violence. In the case of Costa Rica, what we have found is the development of drug matters at the local level, which means that the association of the link between social exclusion and violence goes rather on the side of the market and not of the state. What we find the role of the state, actually the absence of the state, is in the case of El Salvador, where it appears the control of the territory by the young gangs that we call maras. Maras is the plural of mara, you drop the S, and you have the singular, and has the same name as the river in this country, but it has nothing to do with the river. Okay? And with that, we're not saying that social exclusion is the only or even the main cause generating the development of drug matters at the local level or the control of the territories by the young gangs, by the maras. It's one of the factors, okay, there are others. In the case of Costa Rica, it has been crucial in the development of local drug marks, has been the change in the routes of drug trafficking between South and North America, because at the end of the 20th century, the main route was via the Caribbean, and the port of entry was Miami. Remember the famous TV series called Miami Vice, has to do with that moment, okay? Now, after 11 September, the scenario has changed. The route has been redefined via Mexico. That's the reason why the Mexican cartels become so prominent, so important now in international traffic, drug traffic. Okay? And Central America is a kind of bridge between Mexico and South America. The payment of 5 minutes. Okay, no, okay. The payment of services provided in Central America are done in kind. And that's the reason why the drug that is paid in kind has to be put in the local market, and that's the main reason why this local market has developed. Same thing I could say about the maras. There are other factors intervening in the case of the maras in El Salvador. It's been a country with a civil war, with an important flow of migration that explain also, next to the absence of the state, the emergence of these organs. In terms of profit-oriented, what we found in the research is in the case of Costa Rica, is robbery linked to the drug use, the main event, or the main manifestation in terms of this kind of violence. And in the case of El Salvador, what we have is the young gangs exercise violence within the communities, but also protecting the communities against external violence. And finally, about the social violence. Maybe the most important thing to say is those forms of violence, they tend to be silent and invisible because social imaginaries in the communities, and only in the communities, also from the state, are built up especially in terms of the contextual violence. So in Costa Rica, violence means consumption and the selling of drugs. In El Salvador, violence means the importance and the control of the territory by the maras. I end with three issues for policy. The first thing, as I said at the beginning, we didn't find organized communities. We expected a different result, but that's what we found, non-organized communities. And we think, or we point out about the three sets of factors that can explain that. The first thing is we're dealing with communities that has been developed by migratory flows. So what you have is people coming from different parts of the country that they meet in the same urban territory, but they don't have too much relation among them. The second one is there are relatively recent communities, so the time of being in the city is no long enough to have an urban identity. And the third element that goes against the community as an actor is that they suffer stigmatization from the rest of the city. There are areas that are characterized by territorial stigma. The second issue has to do with the development of social imaginaries about the violence and how what we call contextual violence, drugs in Costa Rica, maras in El Salvador, becomes the main form and the unique form of violence, and most of the policy dealing with violence are geared to these kind of issues, and they forget about the other manifestations of violence, like between neighbors, intra-family, gender violence, and so forth. And finally, the third point that we want to highlight is that the youth gangs have an ambiguous role. They are perpetrators of violence, no doubt about that, but also they protect certain social services in terms of regulating conflicts intra-family and between neighbors in the community, and especially, and the most important thing, they protect communities from external violence. Thank you very much.